Hey everyone, welcome back to this chess video, or if it's your first time here to this channel, then welcome to this channel entirely. We have some really good, useful advice for beginners especially here, and in this video I'm going to share some advice that really I don't hear too often or hardly at all with some of these. So without further ado, let's just get right into it, because there's some good stuff that I think as a beginner I would have loved to know way back then. So first, before we get to what's different, we have to explain, well, very briefly, what is the general plan that most people learn as a beginner? What's the general learning process that they're mostly taught? And that process isn't bad. Most of it is people say solve a lot of chess puzzles or tactics puzzles. A lot of times they say follow opening principles. They might say things like don't hang pieces. All of that is useful information and much more. There's very common advice that is thrown out there that isn't necessarily bad in itself, but I think it leaves a lot of advice kind of unexplained. So let's actually get right into this video then and share exactly what things you should also be aware of. So the first bit of advice is a blog post that I did on exactly this topic, which is chess motivation through purpose. And you can read through this on your own time, but essentially it's the idea that the grass is always greener. And so, if you don't have clear goals in mind and why you're chasing those goals, you're always going to be wanting to go after higher and higher rating. And you'll never really be satisfied at that rating if you only focus on the numbers. It's way more important to keep the emphasis on learning, trying to improve, and setting goals for yourself that you feel is realistic, not only of your ability, but also of your use of time. There's nothing wrong with saying, I want a goal of 1,000 because I just want that number. Okay, sure, that's a goal. If you want to go for that, by all means go for it, but understand the time it's going to take to put into it. Similarly, if you have a chess friend who's like, say, 1,500, and you just really want to beat that friend, then understand that you might want to put in a lot of time to try and win, but at the end of the day, will it be worth your time that you invest? Chess takes a lot of time to learn and study, and I think as a beginner, people always, or maybe not always, but a lot of the time, think it's a lot easier than it actually is. So make sure your goals are clear, and that you know why those goals are met, why you want those goals. So that way, when you do reach your goal, you feel satisfied with it, and then you're inspired to keep going further, but you're not disappointed, because I feel like if you're not very clear about your goals and why you want them, have that purpose behind it, it's very easy to reach your goal, feel good for a day or two, and then, all that feeling goes away, and now you kind of have this hole inside where you don't really know about the next rating level. Or worse is that you start chasing some higher number and make that your own goal, but the rating goals never stop. So I just wanted to throw that out there as one bit of advice, is to go through this and be very clear about what chess goals and what purposes you have before you get started in the grind. So that's one thing I wanted to share. The second thing is how much variance actually applies in chess. There is so much rating fluctuation always for everyone. That's a normal thing. Most people think they reach a new goal, maybe 1,200, and they'll always be at 1,200. This is great. I've now made it after all this struggle. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. What's going to happen is you'll be 1,200 for a bit, and then almost inevitably, you will drop it in the 1,100s. Not just once, not just twice, but several times. Your rating goes up and down a lot, and that is normal at all levels. So I just went here into my game archive, and I just filtered my recent rated games. And this is all of them for Rapid. And you can see, here's a loss, here's a draw, here's a win, here's a draw. It goes up and down a lot. You see some wins, some draws. That seems fairly normal, like people can handle that. But it's not always this simple one-and-one back and forth. If it was just a win and draw all the time, people wouldn't get, unmotivated. But like here, you can see, all in this one day, the September 27th, it looks like I went on some kind of bad losing streak. Here was this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games, and I lost 8 of them and I got a draw. So I went 9 games without winning a game. I'm the same me. We can see I kept playing the same day, and I have more games, including a win. Looks like some wins here. It's starting to balance out. But you can see how, even though I've dropped a lot, it can naturally go up and down. I'm the same person. You wouldn't think that these huge streaks are possible and that you're the most unlucky person in the world. But I assure you that these things do happen. If this is a problem for you where you really don't want to drop that much rating, then consider watching my video on the stop loss system so you can help minimize how much you lose. But if you're okay with losing a bit and you're okay with trying to risk some rating in efforts to try and gain more, then, by all means, if you're capable of not having it affect your ability, then keep playing and keep risking it. But understand that the rating up and down is completely normal, and you'll fluctuate a lot. As we see here, there's some more wins, some more losses, and then the next day, the same concept. And it looks like as we go through, it's a more back and forth balance. But all that is completely normal. So I just wanted everyone to know that, the rating changes a lot more than you might think. And so you really can't get mentally attached to your rating number. You have to really treat it as it's a learning process, and I want to get better and better, but my number does not define me. It is just where I'm at temporarily right now. So that's my next bit of advice there. So next thing is average chess rating. So the average rating, most people don't realize, it's a lot lower than most people think. I think a lot of people get really unmotivated when they start making really good progress with chess, but they're not improving as much as they feel like they should. Some arbitrary number they think they should have because they've been, practicing for 6 months or a year or even longer. So with chess, most people think that the average is maybe like 1200-ish because, beginners, maybe 1000-ish they keep hearing. There's a lot of things which some are true, some are not about, if you are just don't hang pieces at a certain level, you'll get to here, like 1000 or 1500 or whatever. Some of those are more true than others. Obviously, the higher up you get, that's more and more not true. So you have to be careful about that. But if we go over here to the percentile, so you go down here. Actually, I think it's global leaderboard. Yeah, here it is. You see the percentile of this distribution. This is the global, as far as chess.com, largest chess site in the world, this is the global distribution. And so we can see here that the numbers here, 500s-ish, we see most players are around 400, 500, 600 level, and that's close to their average. And if you go down here, a little small, but I'll highlight it, 651 is the average chess rating in the world at this exact moment. It fluctuates, as rating naturally fluctuates, as we just mentioned. But generally speaking, somewhere in the 600s, 700s, that'll tend to be where the average is. And so if you reach 1000, which most people still consider beginner level, you're actually way above average. The average is only in the 600s. So when you start reaching ratings like 1000, 1100, 1200, understand that, yes, in chess, you might be beginner to intermediate range as far as ability of what it takes. But as far as average person, your hobbyists, your coffee house players, your player who just plays on the weekend, if you factor all those people in, the average is a lot lower than most people think. So don't get discouraged. If you start making a little bit of progress, you might actually be doing a lot better than you think. And so I want beginners to be motivated at the start, but also have a realistic picture of how good they are in relation to others. So that's the next bit of advice there. So then after that, the next thing I wanted to share is really, if you don't exploit your opponent's mistakes, it's not really that much of a mistake. And this one is kind of hard to internalize because you think objectively, if a move is bad, right? Like if you hang your queen in one move, that's probably a blunder. And if your opponent sees it or not, that's another story, but the move itself was still bad that you had a chance that you could have lost your queen. Now, the same thing could be applied, but when it's smaller nuances, people don't necessarily recognize it as well. So the higher you get, the better you get at chess. Your opponents are going to be better at exploiting your weaknesses that you've leave yourself open to. But especially at the lower levels, if you can't exploit your opponent's very subtle, nuanced mistakes, then it's not really a huge deal for them at that level. And unfortunately, the problem is as you get better and better in chess, you realize you make more and more mistakes you didn't even know you were making, and you start getting punished for them. And so it's that constant process of learning that really helps. Now, to give an example of this, I'll show white playing some pretty good moves, and I'll show black playing some obvious silliness that we'll see here. So we'll start with normal move, d4. We'll have c6, which is okay so far. This isn't too crazy yet. White will grab the center. Good opening principles. Controlling the center is one of them. We have e6, which is a little passive, but not the worst thing yet. We'll have knight f3, a good developing move. Controls the center, opening principles, develops a piece, and it helps him get one step closer to castling. So many good opening principles with this move. Now we have d6, another bit of a passive move. Like really, they probably should be fighting for the center with d5 or something a little more ambitious. But if this is what they play, all right. We'll grab space as white. We'll play c4. And now you kind of get the joke of the silliness. Now they play b6. And you realize they're pushing a lot of pawns, and they're not really contesting the center or gaining much space. So we'll just develop knight c3, good opening principles. And black will keep playing silly. They'll play pawn to a6. And okay, fine. We'll just get developed. We'll play bishop d3. And we'll probably get castle very soon. Alright, so in this position, white has done fabulous. They've got all this going for them. They have a nice space advantage. They have control of the center. They're following opening principles. They're doing everything right from a book perspective. Black, on the other hand, they're not fighting for the center at all. They're being really passive and, as a result, getting cramped on space. They haven't developed any pieces off the back rank, and they are no closer to castling than when they started. So how much is white absolutely crushing black here? Well, unfortunately, if we look at the evaluation, 0.5, which means half a pawn. So white's advantage here is half a pawn as materials equal. That's not much. Most people cannot convert half a pawn. So if I were to have this exact position, and I was white, and a grandmaster was black, it's not even close. They're going to crush me, even though I have such a great opening position here. And very similar, if someone is kind of closely rated to you, or maybe just a smidge higher, the same thing probably happens. Half a pawn is not a huge advantage to really work with. It's a slight advantage. It's something, especially for higher rated players, it's better than nothing. But if you can't exploit these things, then it's really not that huge of a deal. And this is especially problematic with something like this because you can just see visually how bad black's position is. But just because it's not the most ambitious and it's not best, that doesn't mean it's necessarily something you can take advantage of right away. So I think as a beginner, sometimes you just have to understand that certain things are slightly better for one side or another. In this case, white. Things are slightly better for white. But if you can't take full advantage of that, you just kind of have to accept that's okay for the time being. And you try and learn as you progress how you can exploit certain things. But if it's just not in your understanding, you just have to go with what people tell you should work, like opening principles. And hopefully you'll navigate enough that you have a smidge of an advantage, even if it's not enough to instantly win the game for you. So that was something that I think I would have liked to hear, back when I was a beginning player. Might have made me feel a little bit better about some of my advantages. I feel like that I blew the win, when in reality it wasn't actually such a huge advantage to begin with. This one is connected very closely to that part, whereas that if your opponent plays some, very small inaccuracy or even a questionable move, even if it's not inaccurate, but just maybe not objectively the best, or some weakness you can maybe finesse, it doesn't always mean you can take advantage of it. This position is from a game that I actually went over in a past video. That video was on about how to force weaknesses in your opponent's side, and I actually went over that whole game there if you're interested. But here, I play this queen and bishop battery, and the idea is I'm provoking this pawn here. And my entire goal of that, the whole purpose of why I did that, was just because I want to provoke h6, just so that this one pawn is advanced. And so they did play h6. They played exactly what I thought. And this is not a bad move by any means, but it's a small weakness. Their king is now forever weaker because they've pushed that one little pawn in front of their king. Now that looks very small, and unless you're like 1800 or at least 1600 rating, probably closer to 1800, you're not going to fully take advantage of this one little pawn move. And even if you know what to do, it's going to take a long time to take advantage of. And so sometimes you just have to understand this is a weakness, even if I don't understand fully how to exploit it yet. And so that actually connects to my very, very last point. This is the exact reason why positional chess is not taught. I really would have liked to know that earlier. So often coaches especially will tell people do chess puzzles, do chess tactics, just solve a bunch. And that does help because your pattern recognition is very important. And yes, chess puzzles and tactics are important because many games have tactics in them. So you will get better. And if there's one thing that you can do in chess to really increase your rating, kind of the Pareto principle for chess, it's solve chess puzzles. Those tactics are really useful. But especially at the higher levels, tactics and strategy / positional chess start to be a little bit more on an equal side. And in some cases, positional chess is even more important than tactics, especially in closed positions. So in a situation like this here, you might wonder, well, as a beginner intermediate player, why aren't I learning positional chess? Why is nobody talking about this? And unfortunately, the reason is it's a lot easier for a coach to just say, do tactics, because it's very little effort on them. Positional chess is really hard, really advanced, really nuanced, and not always do understand all these details. Even title players sometimes struggle with positional concepts like pawn structure on a very advanced level. And so when a move like h6 is played, this is a positional weakness for black. It's very difficult to explain why this is weak. I could explain how their king is slightly weaker. I could explain how maybe long-term these pawns might advance, create a pawn lever, and now all of a sudden we're ripping open their king. I can also explain the idea between home pawns and ranger pawns. which I've done in another video as well. There's a lot of things you could do to try and describe some of the reasons that this is not so great. But overall, you know, this is something that if you want to fully exploit, you're probably going to have to play very precise here as white and understand this weakness and try and target it for at least 10-20 moves to really see its effect. And most people cannot play that precise, that accurate over the course of the game. It just doesn't happen. Both sides make too many mistakes, and so tactics become way more important. But as both sides start to make less and less errors when they play, then those positional ideas start coming up and being a little more salient as far as what actually happens in the game. In this game, I actually went on to win because partly of this weakness I provoked, and I also later provoked g6, and their king was really weak, and I was able to take advantage of it. But it took many moves to get to that point. If we just breeze through here, see how many moves it was. Yeah, I can show briefly. Skim through these real quickly. I discussed this a lot deeper in the other video, which I discuss all these game moves more move by move. But here, it wasn't until this moment where I provoked g6. And so this is like, what, 8 moves later, right? Because we were on move, yeah, we were on move 10. h6 was move 10 for black. And now this is g6, which is move 18. So it took 8 moves here. And it'll be a few more moves before we actually cash in on this. It was only this blunder where actually now we're starting to really show our advantage. And so this is move 21. You can see it took over 10 moves before that one pawn finally became a problem that actually is more easily seen. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of precise moves. And, you know, if you don't have that positional knowledge right now, you just have to understand that, you know, it's a weakness even if I can't fully take advantage of it yet. So those are some pieces of advice I really hope helps everyone. I really would have liked to hear this back when I was a beginning player, but now you have someone to tell you these things, so at least now you're more aware of it than I was. So thanks for stopping by with this video, everyone. See you in the next one.